All right. Well, good evening. Hi, I'm Blake Smith, and I'm here with my brother Cameron, and we're excited to be having another tough conversation. And just a little bit about myself. I live in Northern Virginia with my wife and two kids, and I blog with Cameron over at blakeandcameron.com. Cameron, over to you. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, everybody, welcome. Glad to have you listening today. My name's Cameron, like Blake said. I live out in Denver, Colorado. I'm a recently honorably discharged Army veteran that moved to Colorado with my new wife. We got married in May for me to launch companies and become an entrepreneur. And so that's what I'm in the thick of doing with my 40-ish hours a week, along with writing the content that I share with Blake at blakeandcameron.com. So we're really pumped to have a conversation. It's January, right? So it's a big start of New Year's resolution. Let's set some goals. Let's lose our 15 pounds. Let's, pick up a new hobby or skill. And so that's sort of a lot of the conversation that's happening right now and leading up to before December 31st and now January 4th. And Blake and I are just going to dive into what some of the common perceptions are of goals and values, and really interesting in talking about, can you have too many goals? Can you have too many values that sort of dictate the way you make decisions in your life? So is that a possibility or not? So Blake, just give us a past, maybe week overview of what leading into 2016, closing out 2015 look like for you and the family over there in Virginia.
Oh man. Well, I like this time of year. I don't know that I always have, but I like the new year, new start. I read something today, new year, new me. I don't necessarily say those words all the time, but I kind of like this time. It's a mark on the calendar that we can just use to at least mentally kind of restart and look forward. Even though the reality is it was a Thursday to a Friday or a Friday to a Saturday last week, and we woke up and it wasn't that big of a deal. But for me and Katie, my wife, we try and treat it a little bit bigger, or at least be intentional about it, to go forward. And so I mean, we set goals. I think one thing that we do, Cam, is I don't have to be done by December 31st. I mean, this is kind of the new year season, if that's a term. And so I'm still working on some goals. I've got 8 big goals that I've got for the year personally, but Katie and I haven't got together yet to kind of hash through those for us and for our family and that kind of thing. But those are some things that we intend to do, which is kind of do our own, list and thinking and think through and then come together and talk about it. And so that's something that we do. But for me, it's an intentional time. And do you do the same? I know you have this year. Have you always done the same?
Yeah. I mean, this year's a little bit different because I'm married this year. And so trying to merge 2 visions, 2 list of goals down into one manageable list has been interesting. But yeah, I usually around mid-December or something in years past, I usually get pretty nostalgic and start looking back. I try to go like each month of the previous year and just sort of think of some of the major events or the major decisions I've made, and try to glean some lessons, a little bit of wisdom, look at the pros and cons and the effects of those, and then sort of jump into, okay, well, what do I want to make happen for my life in the new year? And so it was the same way. This year it was just a little bit more challenging dealing with, I gotta verbalize, I gotta carve out the time.
Sure.
I can't just go to a coffee shop by myself and do that. So it's been interesting because a lot of my personal goals have in a way sort of taken a back seat as Lindsay and I have tried to prioritize what do we want out of our year together and our marriage together for the long term. So it's been interesting. Blake, do you sort of feel like do you have a set number of goals you like to have each year, like 5 or 10, or what does that sort of look like?
Yeah, that's a good. I was actually just about to ask you the same thing. I have not, in years past or this year, like set a limit on a particular number. But what I do try and think through is it's kind of a high standard in order for me to like claim it as a goal or a resolution, and something that I take a hold of, because I do that because I feel like it could be a million things. You know, like you said, I want to lose 5 pounds, and I want to meet my neighbor, and you know,
Yeah.
every day you can kind of go through. So I kind of just raise that bar as to what we even want to talk about, and then I kind of categorize that a little bit. So me personally, professionally, and then specifically to look at us as a family, and then our relationship as a couple, and kind of focus on those, and then spiritually as well, and kind of make sure that I'm doing those categories, and I feel like that helps me make sure that I'm trying to grow and spending time looking at things in a well-rounded manner. So I mentioned marriage, but also relationally, outside of our marriage. So just work relationships and friends. And so like one for me specifically this year is for male friendships, having just moved to Virginia. You know, I'm in that
Hmm.
season of meeting people and that kind of thing. And so I've got one that's specific to, just having some dudes that I want to do life with and that kind of thing. But what about you? Is there a magic number? Do people talk about there being a limit, that you've read?
No, not. I really haven't read it, but I definitely don't have a number either. What I do have, which I found interesting this year, and I've never done it before, was have the distinction between a goal and a value. Um, and so for me, I categorize a value as an overarching theme, an overarching, it could sort of be a goal, but it's sort of like it's the foundation for what I want to build my goals on.
Okay.
So, for example, I want like a value for me and Lindsay and I in our life is quality time with family. Like I have my list of our values right here. And so then out of quality time with family is okay, so what are the goals for that? If that's a value that we want to orient our life decisions around, what is the goal? So some of our goals is dedicated, family reunion time, a trip out to Kansas, a trip down to see family in Colorado Springs or somewhere else, wherever we may all gather. And so that's a goal that emerges from the value. Before, I would just be like, yeah, take a trip here, save $10,000, you lose a few pounds. But now maybe like lose a few pounds is in my be healthy value. So be healthy in what I do and what I consume. And then how do I quantify that, or what does that actually look like in real life? That's where the goals come in. And I know we sort of harp on that a lot at blakeandcameron.com and our other tough conversations and things like that. But is that sort of how you distinguish the two, Blake?
I think that's good. I mean, I definitely distinguish those. I don't think they're interchangeable. I use my values as what is important uh, in life, what is important to me as a person, and that value is a very personal thing. And then I think, like you said, the goal is what do I want to achieve, and I like that you have intentionally, aligned your goals, umbrellaed under your values, and I think that's a critical step there to do that. I wouldn't say, I don't think that that's normal. I
Yeah.
don't think the majority of people do. I think one, that takes a lot of work that you guys did, and so that's why it's not easy to do that. But also, I think I don't know. I think we should have another conversation one day about just what values are, and the difference of what you claim a value to be versus how you actually live. If I say this is very important to me, how does my life reflect that? And so, do I call that a value, or is that really just a talking point? and that kind of thing. So, you know, and
It's beautiful. I couldn't agree more.
yeah, so that's something we can do. But I think, Steve down there asked, what's the difference in quality versus quantity time? And so for you, is that a metric that you used in your, family time planning that y'all did? You've kind of distinguished that quality versus quantity.
Yeah, I think that's key to it. And I would say we distinguish it between, like, if it's quality time, it's really achieving the root in the root goal of these values that we're talking about. And so by doing this and having the forethought, the planning, the intentional choices behind these values really inherently allows it to be quality time over just, hey, we're going to spend 5 hours together, or we're going to spend a weekend together.
Yeah.
And so by sort of coming into the situation, or even coming into the planning that's required to have quality family time or to be healthy, really make sure that you're running on all cylinders of the actual purpose of it.
Yeah.
Because what I found before I was doing these values and these goals and really articulating it was sort of like what you were saying. A lot of what I preached to myself or to others were just talking points. They sounded good. I read them in a book, or, they're tweetable, and, simplify your life, or spend time with family, and tell the people you love that you love them. Those are all these sort of cliches. But now I'm sort of armed with a foundation that I spent several hours working on building and understanding. And so now I feel really prepared to go forward and to actually make progress and turn these cliches into like rhythm and to progress in my own life.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So did you, what about, is there such a thing as too many, goals as you sat down and hack these out? If you've got, whatever you said, 8 to 10 written values, then I mean, you can't just have one underneath, but does it getting to a point where there's too many such thing?
It does. And I've recently been working on this issue of time, written a few blog posts about it. And that's the only reason I think that I can give that absolutely answer, is because I've recently realized how finite my time is. I don't have the time to accomplish all the goals I want. I mean, I want to be fluent in Spanish. I want to learn lessons. I want to achieve all these values. I want to save a certain amount of money. I want to start companies. I want to travel. And it's just not realistic, right? And so before, I would just write down a lot of these goals and never really have the ability to follow through, because if you do not plan it out, you're going to give a 20% effort to these things that really demand, 80, 90% efforts of your mental, heart, relational energy.
That's good. No, I that's great. That's very interesting. I would agree. I think that even goes back to, look, you've got, and you mentioned that you've done it in the past. You've got a list of 20 goals, and they tie to these values that you have. But I think an interesting challenge as you're thinking through this, and I know that you kind of did this, we talked about it last time, as you're planning ahead, is to actually look back. So to look back and see, where was my time spent over the last year? In 2015, where did I spend my time? How did we get together with family? Did we travel? Did my wife and I have dates that we said were important? Where did I spend my money? Did I save for something that I said was important? And, like you said, it's finite. All of a sudden, you couldn't have reached all 20 of those things unless they are congruent and they're parallel, and maybe you're knocking a couple out at the same time. But, it, like you said, it's finite. So and I think that goes back to my point of, I've got a high bar for something that I would to call something a goal, because of that reason. I can't do it all. And I know that it's finite. I didn't, put the word on it like you did there. And so I appreciate that for just using that as a filter even more, because you can't do everything. And so there's probably
limited people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably a magic number out there of what it is that you can do. But that's going to be, it's going to be, your number is going to be different than my number. And I don't think that that's really important at all, is to try and hack down this number. I think what's the most important is to define that goal, clearly define it, and then dig into that a little bit more. Because I mean, the other truism about this time of year is people set these goals and resolutions, and then in 2 weeks, you don't even remember what it was. You're definitely not following it. You quit intentionally, sure, or you forgot, and you see it at the gym and everything like that. But that's going to happen when the goal's not clearly defined, and it didn't matter enough to you to actually do it. And so if something is of value to you, is valuable, you're going to actually do the work to do it. And that doesn't make it easy to do just because it's important to me. But it does mean that I need to kind of buck up a little bit in certain areas that are hard to spend my time on, or spend my money on, or not spend my money on, however that works out to align with a goal, and yeah, you're kind of step up to it. So I mean, that's all kind of filtering out as you kind of talked about that. But, so that just the importance of kind of clearly defining it, and then asking that question, okay, great, it's clearly defined goal, but also what motivates me about that goal? Like, why did I even write that down? Why did that come to mind in the first place?
Sure. So. Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head with a lot of it. And I see that question from Steve down there about, millennials setting goals and things like that. And the reality that in 2 to 3 weeks, the gyms are going to be empty from all the New Year's resolution folks. And what does that signify? It means that it wasn't that important to begin with, or they weren't committed to it. Like, it wasn't, it wasn't emerged out of an intrinsic value to lose 10 pounds or to get healthy again. And so when that's why I think really, I do have 9 values right now that Lindsay and I are trying to live with. And I think that in 2 to 3 years, or maybe by the end of this year, I would hope that we could even simplify that more, because what I think the power of those values is that not only does it help you set goals, but then it's the lens through which you make every decision or minor decision. And if you can go through that mental checklist of 3 to 4 values, and they have they're put into a phrase of like, we want to spend quality time with family, or we want to nurture and prioritize close friendships, then you can sort of say, does this achieve that, or does it not achieve that? If it does, should I be doing this? Probably so. If not, how can I make it achieve one of these values or goals? Or what can I do to maybe just say, no, I need to prioritize these 3 to 4 things. Or for me right now, it's 9. And I just wonder how that will actually play out for me in the future.
Yeah.
And so, Blake, thinking about all this stuff, how about let's get to some practical reality here. Do you have like an example of maybe the past month or so where you guys have, articulated your values and goals and then had to like make decisions based off of that?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Well,
so give some of the specifics behind that, maybe for the listeners.
Yeah, sure. One that comes right to the forefront of my mind is we just did a big move. We used to live up in Rhode Island. In November, we moved down to Virginia. So we're kind of just coming out of that fog and settling in down here. But as we prepared for that move, there were a couple things that were just hitting on all those things you were just talking about within our values. And one of my written goals for last year, one of our written goals, was to live close to friends, church, and work. And close is obviously relative. In the Northern Virginia area, that close is like time for me. So 15, 20 minutes. That has nothing to do with mileage up here, just due to the sheer numbers of people. But for us, that was very, very important. And so I had that written down. We had a date that we wanted set to be moved by. The other thing that we had a big goal for an amount of money that we wanted to save for the year for our future house that we're eventually going to buy. Whenever I have the ability to buy a house and not move every 12 to 18 months for the Army. And so I had a goal for money to be saved. I had a goal for where we wanted to live. And those things started to there's a lot of friction in between them because where we were looking at living, where our church is, where my work is, and where the people that we want to spend life with are living, it is very, very expensive to live here. Rent is ridiculous. And so, you obviously filter all that by, well, we can pay less by living further away. But for me, I didn't want to spend more time in the car. I knew that if we lived 30 minutes from my good friends up the road, we would not see them hardly ever. I mean, it was just the reality. I've been through this before. I knew what it would be. As soon as you add that friction, it's just not going to happen. Yeah. And so those things were really important. What we ended up doing was we found a spot, but I had to compromise on other things that I thought were important to me: size of my house, having a yard, space for my dog. And so now we're doing something we haven't done is we live in a townhome now. And it's not all that bad, but that was a huge compromise for me personally for a little bit. And it took me a while to get there, because what it allowed us to do was to hit those other goals that we had clearly defined, that were highly motivating us. And that really, like you said, were parallel to those values that we had. But it wasn't even easy to do. Even with that, I had they totally aligned with two of my written goals back in January. It was all that, and I still was wanting to compromise. And I'd go to Katie and say, "Oh, but we could have this house, but for $500 more a month, we could do it." And I mean, I ended up being the one that was more willing to compromise than her, and her encouragement to say, "No, look, we said this was really a goal. This was really important, and it's going to be more important than, the picket fence, quarter acre and that kind of thing." And so that was a really interesting exercise for me, and for us to work through. And so, I mean, I think that lines up with the example that you were asking.
Yeah. So to recap, you guys had roughly, two goals in this scenario. One is live close to the people you care about there in your new home in Virginia, and, save some money so you could eventually buy a house and maybe live a little bit cheaper. And then you go into the situation where, oh, well, if we're going to keep our normal standard of living and rent a house, that means we're going to forsake that second goal of saving money. If we want to live in a cheaper house and fulfill that goal of saving money, then we're going to be 30, 40 minutes away from the people we want to spend time with. And I think you used the buzzword for that was just friction. There is friction in all of that kind of stuff. And you can either bail on your goals. You can either just say, well, it's going to be easier. I'm sick of thinking about this. Let's just do it and live in the nicer, bigger house, closer to friends, perhaps, or say adios to your friends and save the money living somewhere cheaper. And then that friction really helped this alternative, a townhouse, sort of emerge.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think the other thing that's interesting as I think back to that, like if this would have happened a year ago or 18 months ago, I would have compromised on the home and paid more in rent and everything like that. I would have done it. What's enlightening to me is that we stuck with that. We made some of those compromises on house and location, everything like that, in order to sink in. And it wasn't because it was a goal to hit. It was because they were in line with our values, and those things we held very dear, and we were very motivated by it. We felt very strongly about it. So the fact that it was written down is something, but I'm not. That is certainly not going to be the reason. I'll be the first to bail on a goal, like to use your words, if it's the right thing to do. And so, but because we had done the process of working through it, analyzing why it's important and even writing those things down it's we actually went back and looked back through that and said, look, the reason that we want to save this amount of money this year is because it'll help us achieve that. And these things are really, really important to us. And so, and Katie would say, that's so we can do this for 2 years if it's going to help with that. And it just it made it way more clear to me and made it that much more easy to say, okay, yes, this is what we want to do, even though other people were trying to talk us out of it, or other people were, changing, giving different examples. So.
No, that's awesome. And I just think, it's those experiences, growing, learning, thinking about how do we apply this last time? What does that look like going forward? That, it's January 2016 right now. And this is the season where people are making lots of goals like that. I think it's been a great conversation. It's really challenged me to think about that, and even just the number and the threshold of how many do you have, and does that matter? Or what are the consequences of having a lot, or having some but maybe not really well defined? So as you think about it, Blake, so what would you say is your biggest takeaway from this, or the thing that you'd want to stress the most?
I think hearing about it, it was good talk of goal and value and all that, and especially the number. But I think what I'm really struck with, especially as I was just telling my own story, was that importance of not just saying a goal and defining it, but to actually look it through. And so here's what I did last year. This is what I'm doing this year to make sure. And for me, it really played out well. So I write down the goal, and I make sure it's really specific. And I use SMART acronyms: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and then time driven. And I write that out. But it's not just that. We don't leave it at that. Then we go through and then we say, okay, I'm looking at my template that I have right here. Key motivations. Like, why is that goal important to me? Why is that goal important to us? What's the bigger picture here? And that's really, it ties in those values of what it is, because sometimes a goal plays a small role in the bigger picture. And then we go through and say, okay, then in order to start achieving this goal, what's the very next step we got to do? And I write that down, and then we go do that step. And then I look on those regularly. I have it. It's in my workflow. I do a weekly review, and I go back through those. And so it's staying fresh in my mind. And as those actions are accomplished, then it's okay. Now that we've done this, what's the next thing we need to do? And sometimes that next thing is a really quick step, and sometimes that next thing is a couple months of work. But to be able to do that is to have that written specific goal, to have the motivations behind it, and to have your next steps outlined. And then with a periodic review, I feel like that is the recipe for having a goal that aligns with your values that you're actually going to achieve. And whether the number, whatever the final number is, I don't know. I couldn't tell you, but certainly going through those steps will limit it down to make sure that you've raised that standard for what a goal is for your own year.
Sure. That's money. I think that's the money right there. And you definitely need to write a recap of that, and we'll publish that on the blog soon here, especially the SMART acronym that you mentioned, and the key motivators and things like that you were talking about. I think that's key, and that drives into what I think one of my biggest takeaways too is, it takes time. You spent time sitting there articulating, hey, what is the goal? Let's write it out, well defined. Let's put it into this SMART acronym, and then let's readdress it, weekly, monthly, those types of things. And without that, you're not going to really get the results that you want, and your values are not going to be, displayed in the things that you commit to with your time. And so it's buckling down, knowing that if you want to live the life you sort of are frustrated that you're not living, and if you want to achieve the things that you want, be it financial independence, living close to friends, like what you were saying, it takes time and commitment, and obviously a good bit of sacrifice there. But the sacrifice, from what I found, it drifts away because you're living your life on the values that you want to be around.
Yeah, well
Awesome
said.
stuff.
Well said. Yeah, well, go ahead and close this up, Cam. And then
Yeah,
obviously we'll close up, but then if there's any questions or anything from anybody, by all means we can keep going after that without recording it or whatever. So
yeah, definitely. Been another great, tough conversation here on Blab. I'm Cameron. That's my brother Blake. We write at blakeandcameron.com, and we really challenge each other and you guys, our viewers and the audience out there, with really ensuring that the things you're doing with your life are really predicated on your goals and your values. And those things are what dictate how you spend your most precious resources. We've talked about time a lot. This blab and this conversation, we also tackle the money issue. They're tough conversations, but we like to dive into them, and we host them here and at blakeandcameron.com. Really appreciate everyone for listening. Have a great week and spend the time and write out your goals and your values and then figure out how you're going to make them play out in your life. Have a great night.